Mixing is more about understanding fundamentals than using fancy techniques, but a mixing trick can go a long way if you want to make your vocals really impress your listeners. With that in mind, I spent some time compiling all of my favorite ones, some I've learned from other engineers and some I came up with after some experimenting, and put them into one video. So stick around, I'm going to show you my favorite vocal mixing tricks. First off, we have ducking any vocal effect. So ducking an effect, or attenuating it whenever another signal occurs, is incredibly valuable when you're mixing vocals. Now this is most true with reverb. A reverb's pre-delay can be helpful for retaining the vocal's intelligibility. However, ducking reverb is by far the best way to add vocal reverb without getting that annoying washed out sound. The problem is, I can only think of one reverb plugin that includes a ducking function, that being Seventh Heaven, the Bricasti M7 emulation. So unless you have this plugin, it would seem that you'd have to rely on pre-delay and hope that you don't lose the vocal during the mixing process. Fortunately, I found a way to duck any reverb, delay, or any effect that you want, and you could do it with most stock plugins. So instead of inserting the reverb on the vocal track, use a send, auxiliary, or parallel track, and insert the reverb on that. Dial in the reverb settings however you see fit, but be sure to keep the mix at 100%. Then, after the reverb, insert a compressor that's capable of an external sidechain. I'll use this Logic stock compressor, but use whichever one that you want. For the sidechain, select the original unprocessed vocal, and ensure that the compressor's sidechain is set to external. So at this point, the reverb is already being attenuated by the dry vocal, so it really doesn't take too long to set this up. But this gets even better when you consider how much control you get over the ducking. For example, I could set a super quick attack and a longer release to turn down the reverb right when the vocal starts, and to keep it attenuated until the vocal's passage ends. Or I could set a quick release so that each vocal phrase triggers the ducking. Or say I want the very beginning of the vocal to reverberate before the reverb is turned down during the middle of the vocal's phrase. I could increase the attack to about 50 milliseconds to let a little of the vocal through before compression to the reverb starts. Also, maybe you want to use an 1176 or maybe an LA2A, that's completely up to you. In other words, you could do just about any compression configuration and have complete control over how the vocal's reverb behaves. So let's take a listen to this using stock plugins, but whenever you try it, substitute these with whichever plugins and settings that you want.
Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble.
Next up, let's talk about phase cancellation-based de-essing. So I don't use this trick all that often, but when it's needed, it can really save a vocal. So have you ever had a vocal with so much sibilance that de-essing doesn't seem to work at a certain point? Either it still sounds harsh, or you compress the sibilance so much that now it sounds completely unnatural. So after having this issue on some vocals, I came up with this trick, so I hope it can help you out. In short, we're going to use subtle phase cancellation to turn down S's. And we'll do it dynamically, so it only happens when the S's are high enough in amplitude. To do this, you'll need a linear phase EQ that offers dynamic bands. I'll use this Pro Q3, but a great affordable alternative is this Tone Boosters EQ. To start, send the vocal to an auxiliary or parallel track. Then, insert a utility plugin and invert the phase. At this point, if you were to play the two at the same time and they're equal in amplitude, the vocal should completely null or be turned off entirely. Next, insert the linear phase EQ on the auxiliary track, and of course, ensure that it's set to a linear phase mode. Next up, use high and low pass filters to isolate the range that's responsible for the sibilance. This will likely be between 5 to 10 kHz, but it varies from vocal to vocal. Last up for the EQ, create a bell filter between these two filters and make it dynamic so that it greatly expands or dynamically amplifies that isolated range. Then, lower the aux track's channel fader by a good amount. Since the parallel signal is inverted, whenever sibilance triggers the dynamic band, more phase cancellation will occur to that range. In turn, the sibilance that triggered it is attenuated. If the channel was set at 0 dB, then the range would be attenuated way too much. However, since we lowered it significantly, then only a little bit of the range is attenuated when the sibilance triggers the bell filter. So, let's take a listen to it. I'll start with the aux track set too high so that you can really hear the attenuation. Then I'll reduce it until it sounds right. Now notice how smooth the attenuation sounds. Since we're not compressing the range, which causes distortion, and instead naturally canceling it out, we achieve a very natural sound.
Think it was impossible. May have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible. May have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible. May have been a bit of trouble.
Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Watch the rest of this video, and at the end, use the link in the description to get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Last up, let's talk about saturating just the fundamental. So sometimes you want saturation or distortion to affect the full vocal. Maybe you're trying to emulate a piece of hardware, or you want a vintage sound. But sometimes you just want the saturation to fill the frequency spectrum in a musical way. In other words, in a way that relates to the musical content of the performance. Now you can achieve this with a multiband saturation plugin and by causing saturation only to that range that includes the fundamental frequencies of the performance. However, there are only a couple plugins that let you do this. So instead of buying those, you could use this method to expertly control the harmonics that are included in your vocal. Like the two previous tricks, send the vocal to an auxiliary or a parallel track. First, insert a linear phase EQ and use low-pass filters to isolate the vocal to just the fundamental range. Then, insert whichever saturation that you want. I'll use this free GSAT plugin, but try different plugins and see which one suits the vocal best. Then, begin to saturate the isolated fundamental range. Since the fundamental is causing saturation, the harmonics are much more likely to musically relate to the vocal's performed notes. If I was saturating the full vocal, then sometimes the fundamental will trigger the saturation. However, it could also be other parts of the performance. So this way we can be certain that the harmonic distortion is related to the performed note. So at this point, we have the vocal's fundamental and the related harmonics. But I don't need two instances of the fundamental, one from the original and one from this parallel track. So I'll insert another parallel EQ after the saturation plugin and use a high-pass filter to attenuate the fundamental frequencies. With this done, this parallel track now only contains harmonics of the fundamental, and I can blend them in with the original clean vocal. Not only does this fill the vocal incredibly well and make it sound more musical, it makes it super easy to automate the effect. Furthermore, I could add additional effects to this parallel track if I wanted to. So, it offers a lot of control and is the only method for perfectly isolating harmonics. So let's take a listen as I introduce the parallel track and then vary the amount of distortion by adjusting the channel fader.
Think it was impossible. May have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible. A bit of trouble. Think it was impossible. May have been a bit of trouble.
Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.